thank you for coming. As Caroline said, I trained as a photographer, so that's my first skill set. Horticulture is definitely, it runs parallel, but when it cuts to questions and answers at the end, please keep it to photographic rather than too much into horticulture, because I may not be able to answer the questions. So I'm going to start by showing some pictures from a garden that's been worked on by Dan Pearson, Folly Farm just outside Reading. And this particular garden was finished after a 7-year project. It's a Lutyens ducal garden, and this particular shot is all about time of day. And as Caroline said, time of day is everything for a garden photographer. It either has to be first thing in the morning or last thing in the evening. Unfortunately, there's just no getting away from that quality of light in order to get the best picture. And this image here was actually taken under moonlight, as you can see. So very long exposure, using a bit of filtration to actually encourage the sky to lower its contrast, and so you can concentrate into the middle of the sunken pool garden and the tulips just ping out through that cool tone. And again, we're going to be moving backwards and forwards from garden. So from gardens to garden, we might not always stay in the same garden, but it will flow, so bear with me on this one. This is Orpheus, Kim Wilkie's garden in Boughton House. And I was commissioned to shoot this for Gardens Illustrated. And again, I haven't gone for the obvious composition. Of course, I did shoot it because I needed to cover that. But for this, shooting under the same kind of conditions of moonlight, I wanted to show that the structure, the earth mound, just behind the row of trees, it's prominent, but it's not the first thing you actually view. So rather than actually going straight to it, the abstract of the trees reflecting in the lake itself really helps you to kind of settle in with the picture. And again, using the same quality of light. And these shots have all been taken probably about an hour before the sun actually rises. So, and again, this is now at Folly Farm. This is a morning, February time. So again, you can see it's got the coolness and slight warmth that comes through, but it's very, very soft. And the wonderful thing about the morning is you do get mist, and that actually makes the picture for me. And again, we're taking those shots probably 20-30 minutes before the sun actually rises, and now you can start to see it comes in from the left-hand side, and we're really starting to pick up the colour of the same shot. And this is just to show the difference between the morning light and the evening light. So we've got morning coming from the left-hand side, nice and soft, and then in the evening, equally as nice, but much stronger, colours are stronger, and the contrast is stronger. Now, whether you decide to shoot morning or evening, everyone has their preference. I tend to shoot more in the evening in the summer months, and in the winter months, obviously I shoot more in the morning. Maybe that's because of the sun rising, but I do obviously do majority of my work at sort of 4:30 in the morning or 8:30 in the evening. So it's, and as I said, there's no getting away from that. So this is Boughton House again, an evening shot onto the west front of the house. This is where Kim Wilkie's Orpheus is, which is just onto the right-hand side. Patience is required, waiting for a long time for that to happen. And as I stood there with my camera, you can actually see each window along the west front light up as the sun sets. So it's very difficult to kind of know which picture to show, really, because it's quite impressive to see it. But that, for me, works beautifully. And again, it has perfect symmetry, and it works beautifully there. Now, this is hot off the press, really, because I was shooting this 2 weeks ago. This is a garden in Belgium. It's called Castel van Hex, and it was a shoot for Gardens Illustrated. It's a private estate, and they just have the most incredible vegetable garden. As you can see, kitchen garden. Perfect rows of flowers and vegetables growing together. I knew that I had to be in this position for a sunset shot. The balance of it worked beautifully. You can see I got a high vantage point. And again, it's all the elements coming together at the same time, which doesn't always happen. I only had 24 hours in Belgium to do this shoot, so I was really lucky that actually I had the conditions on my side. It doesn't always happen, but fortunately for this one it did. You can see the sun's just setting on the right-hand side. And of course I took a series of pictures, probably shooting half an hour before and half an hour after. Because it's incredible, because the evening light, once the sun's actually set, you still get a nice glow in the sky that can illuminate a garden. And it's by no means a time to stop shooting. You can certainly carry on. And I did with this. And again, this was shot a couple of weeks ago in Folly Farm. Again, it's that whole thing of composing and also using the light to its favour, really, because the one thing I always find unusual with, it comes from, I suppose, Kodak days of when you had your film packs, and the one thing it always said was, don't take photographs unless the sun's behind you. And it was one of those things was the first thing I'd learnt about photography at 7 years old. Have the sun behind me, I'm fine, I can take my picture now. And I've had people on my courses that have said the same thing. If I point my camera towards the light, it's going to damage my sensor. I would say I take probably 70% of my pictures into that direction entirely. So as you can see, the sun's coming up on the right-hand side. We're keeping all the detail within the garden still. We're seeing every single bit, but we're also getting the effect of the sun coming up. We're keeping the blueness in the sky. So these kind of shots work and they balance perfectly. Now, this is a bit technical, but as I said, there will be questions and answers at the end, so I can answer a few things about the filtration I use. The top of the sky has to be controlled. Quite often people will see a scene and they will take a picture and they come back and think, well, it's not quite as I saw it, because of course the eye adjusts so much for the scene, whereas skies tend to be a lot more contrasty, they're much brighter than the actual landscape, the garden. So you use a neutral density filter, which you literally just pull over the top of the scene. You can see what it's doing, and all you're doing is literally pulling down the contrast of the sky, and you can actually see it as it's happening. And I would say it's probably one of the most important pieces of kit I have. It's almost used entirely, and without that piece of kit it would be very hard to do that. Even in post-production in Photoshop, you would struggle to do it. And again, all about using the light, shooting into the light. I mean, I'm actually even allowing the camera to flare there slightly. So these verbena are sort of, you see the left-hand side of the image is almost blowing out completely, and suddenly it turns to this wonderful contrast on the right. And I would have taken that picture off the tripod, handheld. So I'm not glued to my tripod by any means. I know some people are worried to kind of get their cameras off the tripod, but certainly with this shot, by this time I'm moving around. Because the thing is, when I arrive at a garden, I have a lot of pictures to get in a very short space of time. I might have an evening there, I might have a morning there, so I'll have a window of, say, 3 hours. I've been in situations where I've arrived at a garden and I haven't even actually seen the garden before. So I have to do a recce very quickly and then try to be in the right position for up to 20 shots. So in order to do that, I have to work quickly, and that does mean that occasionally I have to take the camera off the tripod, I have to run around, and I literally mean run around, and to sort of pick up these kind of shots where it just creates atmosphere. And again, using the tree line, using trees to filter, as well as the filtration, you're then using the tree itself to allow you to shoot directly into the sun. and all the corners are picking up the highlights there beautifully. And again, we can see the same thing happening. And these are all at Folly Farm, where, and again, this was shot a couple of weeks ago, and you can see the seasonally it's as it is now. So, and compositionally, it works. It's straight down the middle. You can see we've got that midway line. We've got the verbena that comes in from the left and the right. The grasses in the middle and the scanthus that just starting to pick up the light, and then the sun itself just poking its head up above the hedge. And of course, by the time the sun gets to the top of the tree line, which will probably be 40 minutes after the sun's risen, you couldn't take that shot. That shot's gone. So it's really important that you're obviously in the right place at the right time. And this is evening light. Again, it's just waiting for things to sort of happen, and it's quite theatrical. That Stipa gigantea is just beautifully lit. And it probably happened for 5 seconds or so, 5-10 seconds. So I'm there, I've set the shot up, I haven't anticipated this was going to happen, but then something, a bit of magic happens, and you're blessed with a shot like this. As you can see, the sky again is holding a lot of detail, and it's moving quickly. So as it moves, and it's moving over the sun, the landscape's changing all the time, and the garden's changing. So it's quite important that you're looking to the sky as much as anything else if you're after a change of light. Now this shot was taken for a piece for Country Living, and it was probably organised and produced within a millimetre of its life, quite frankly, because we knew exactly all the elements that were going to constitute the shot, but of course we had shot something previously that didn't quite work because we were too late and we didn't get the timing right. So we went back to this same shot, and as you can see, the sun is just starting to peek over the top of the hill there, and the moment that sun actually goes, it's too bright, it's too strong. So literally had, again, everyone was in place beforehand, the gardener was there with a hoe, and we shot either side of it, but making it work was the slight glow that's just coming through in the greenhouse. So we had several shots that were all sort of close contenders, but this one really came together nicely. And all the other elements, again, compositionally, it works as a painting, really. And again, using that same filter that I mentioned earlier, the neutral density filter, absolutely essential for this kind of shot. I mean, I have lots of people that say, but surely you can do this in post-production. But I don't really want to spend my entire time at a computer, like probably most of us. We spend enough time on it anyway. So if I can do it in camera, I always will. And it stems from the days of shooting film when you didn't have that option. And that wasn't that long ago, really, for me. So yeah, that's... and also this particular picture won a classic view in the Landscape Photographer of the Year. So it did quite well, really. And this is all about planning and preparation. This was a reshoot a year later for Gardens Illustrated, and because again we were too late for the alliums, but we knew this planting was happening at this garden. This is it's called the Mill House in Gloucestershire, private garden again. And this particular morning, the alliums were perfect. We even had this slight mist again. And of course, when that happens, you know that when the sun starts to come up through, it's going to give you these lovely rays. And the only way I've managed to control the shot to keep the detail in the bottom part of the picture as well as the top is to wait for the sun to find its way behind a larger branch of the tree. And that's kind of enabled me to capture the image. Every time that sun went slightly higher or prior to this, the sun's just directly into the lens and it's impossible to photograph it. And again, it's just, you're thinking about these things constantly. But that's worked really well. And this is back at Castel van Hex, the Belgian garden, kitchen garden. And so this is the morning after the evening before. And as you can probably see, the balustrade along the top was where I took the picture looking back towards the church. I didn't actually think I was going to be able to get a picture in the morning because it was all just a bit too flat. And it's quite often a hard thing to photograph. When a garden's entirely flat, you need to get some form of elevation. But again, it's got that morning light happening with the slight mist. The sun's positioned behind a tree again, so that we can actually keep all the detail in the foreground. And you can just see the chateau off to the right-hand side. And again, using a neutral density filter again to control it all. And this is here. So this was Wednesday night. So this was a first in a series for Gardens Illustrated. So we're going to shoot it this year and next year. And I was here on Wednesday evening. Again, I'd been here before, waiting to see how the garden reacts to the light. And of course, I don't know, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what other people think. I mean, I think, for me, this garden seems to work well going down towards the gallery. Much more, for me, that way rather than going up. It's a difficult thing because although there is a slight slope, it tends to, you see a lot more going down because of the actual planting itself reveals itself. And controlling that light, and there again. I actually spent, I say I don't retouch, I did a bit of retouch here because of course there were a few cars parked in around there and there's a telegraph line, I don't know if you know, that runs along there. So I do occasionally take a few things out. I don't necessarily move elements of the garden around, but I will get rid of the odd distracting satellite dish or a telegraph line. But again, I don't think that's really too much of a cheat. And the other thing is vapor trails. I think I have actually taken one or two out, but there's still a couple that are lurking there. But I mean, how much time do you have to do that, really? But that was taken very, very late. Again, probably about 6:45, just before the sun actually goes down behind. And I moved around and shot that way as well. And this is all in camera, so nothing apart from getting rid of the old telegraph line has been, and again using a neutral density filter just to control the light at the top to balance the picture. And the things you're looking for, because these are wide shots, these are quite big shots, so the kind of shots that you would really struggle to control if it was midday. This shot's just not going to work. I mean, you can take the shot, of course, but to get this quality of light, it's never going to work. So you are looking for how the light, as you can see there, I mean, I kept the camera in the same position for probably 5-10 minutes, just watching how different parts of the garden started to pick up and catch the light. And we can see there over the left-hand side, there's just a block of Rudbeckias that are just starting to pick up a bit of the colour there. And again, no light really on this section of the garden at all. All the light now is in the sky and just over to the left-hand side. But plenty of colour. And this is another of Pete's gardens, Scampston Wall Garden. This was shot from actually partly a crane, believe it or not. It doesn't look as if I'm up that high, but I was probably up a fair distance. And it's a garden that's great to see this time of the year, but very, very flat. So you are working with a tapestry of textures, and you really need the light to work for you in order to pick up these pictures. So when I'm framing and I'm looking, I'm trying to see the one thing for me instantly that I see is this pattern of red that works all the way through. So I'm going from the left corner all the way around and back up again and up to the sky. So that instantly draws my eye in. And then you've got the contrast values of things like the, I think it's phlomis heads, seed heads, that are really shining through against a very, very light coloured grass. Because it's quite overwhelming to see a view like that and thinking, well, how do I construct my picture? And even here, where you can start to see the seed heads against the dark hedging there. And again, early hours of the morning. And another shot from Scampston Wall Garden as well. That was the evening though, so I was there for the entire day. And you can start to see the long shadows of September light. It's very warm, so it's a great time to be out photographing at the moment. But I tend to have a rule of thumb with where I try to position the light. I'm talking about light all the time and not actually the garden, and that's often a controversial thing because as a photographer, when I arrive at a garden, the first thing that I'm aware of is the light within the garden. Rather than the structure of the garden, it's actually the light. It doesn't mean that you're completely ignoring the design, it's just the fact that the thing that will actually compose your picture is how the light falls on the subject, because when the light's behind you and hitting the subject flat on, the image will be completely flattened and it's just never, it's not going to work. So again, the rule is to have the light coming in from 10 past the hour or 10 to the hour, if you can imagine that. So, I mean, most things photographically are always backlit because even people, they just look, it looks better and it really enables the subject matter to pull away from the background as well. So we can see these block seats. Just having that light coming in from the right-hand side gives it a lot of modelling and the tone breaks up nicely, so we've got this nice shadow against this highlight. This is a garden designed by Ginny Blom in Oxfordshire. Again, a very, very manicured garden in quite a big landscape. And I can't resist but try to pull the landscape in from beyond when I compose this picture. And for this particular shoot, it was booked 6 months in advance for the day, and which is very unusual because, of course, I tend to get a commission and then I'll have a little bit of leeway with the weather and I can schedule it around that. So I'm talking with the gardener as well as the magazine and making sure that we can get the right weather over a period of, say, it can be shot in June, but this one was actually June the 26th, commissioned in February. So we had one hit at it, and fortunately it worked, which was fantastic. And again, this is really all about, if there's a sky in a picture, then I like to try and make the most of it. And I think I could have easily have pulled the camera down slightly to give me a little less sky, a bit more of the garden. But actually, I think the balance for this works really nicely. And the tree line in the background, just, it's a continuation of the garden. And of course, the roses were all looking perfect at the time as well, which is fantastic because, I mean, there was no guarantee that was going to happen. And again, same garden, moving around, exploring different compositions. Don't stop at the first composition, just to actually think, well, I'm going to move around now and actually see. I'm always looking to see how the yew columns, I can see every one, rather than being in a position where you don't get the repetition of shape. So the whole image moves down to the middle and then off, and you sort of float through the rest of the landscape. And again, controlling the contrast and bringing down the sky to match the foreground. And this is from the same garden. We've got this, whenever I see water, rather than, before I set the camera up, I tend to try and visualize what it is I'm after. So if I know there's water and I know there's a sky, I'll always try to reflect the sky in that water. And again, it just it just adds another dimension to the picture and gives it extra strength. And the sky here, a bit like this evening, I was talking to Caroline actually, it's that thing of when do you think could you have shot tonight? And it's remarkable, the smallest amount of detail that you have in a sky would be enough to actually control and make a picture without having to revert to retouch and Photoshop and that kind of thing. Because this was actually very soft light. There was hardly any light on this day at all, but just enough colour to make that picture work. Now this is Ulf Norvell's garden in Sweden, Chelsea garden designer. And again, this was a pretty hairy thing to have commissioned, because we were going to go after Chelsea, and Ulf had been at Chelsea doing a garden for a month beforehand, so he had no idea what his garden was going to look like, because he hadn't been there for such a period of time. So the magazine, well, myself and a writer, we were commissioned to go out for 24 hours to photograph his garden and go out with Ulf. And he was kind of, well, he was running hot and cold with it, because of course naturally he thought, well, we might go there, arrive there, and actually the garden could be destroyed. I have no idea. I don't really know what it's going to be like. And the whole feature is based around tulips and perennials working together. But again, we were very lucky, and on this particular shoot, it was almost in the Arctic Circle, so it was 2 flights to get there, and I arrived, and the moment there was any light, good light, I started shooting, and from the moment I arrived to probably 2 o'clock the following morning, I just kept shooting, and when Ulf was waking up the next morning at 6 o'clock, I was kind of slightly wired by the whole fact, because I'd been up 24, probably almost 48 hours by this time, and I'm so excited by the fact that it was in the bag, because I just didn't think we were going to get that. And this was a shot that I took at probably about midnight, I would have thought, because of course you literally can shoot 24 hours a day there. And the light's remarkable, and quite remarkable to see a garden like that where it was in that part of Sweden. And this is now about, it's about what I was saying to you earlier about the amount of work that you have to achieve in such a short space of time. People often would say, well, what's the difference between an amateur photographer and a professional photographer? I can't have an off day, and I can't have a day where I don't come back with the pictures. So these kind of shots are quite loose. I take pictures like this, walking around quite quickly off the tripod, and just looking for literally light playing in the garden. And this kind of thing, where you could easily miss it. If you're fussing around with a tripod, trying to get it all set up all the time, you can miss shots like this. And I literally put the bag down and I run with a camera in my hand, and I'm picking up all these extra shots at the end of the day. And quite often they get used quite large in the magazine, which is ironic really, because you spend all this time on the other shots and these little beautiful handheld ones. Again, it's photography, it's the moment, isn't it? We've always, Cartier-Bresson is that classic thing of, it doesn't matter how much you structure a picture, there's something that photography as an art form has that no other disciplines have, and it has the moment, it has that kind of instant moment, and these are how these shots work for me. Again, this is Panicum at Scampston Wall Garden. Looking to see how the light works, everything backlit. You can imagine if that shot itself was, the light was the other way, it just wouldn't have that same fieriness to it. And of course there's lots of these plants out in this garden that I've shot in a very similar way. And just allowing the composition to work in that nice curve. And again, the same plant. but again using the flare to actually go straight into the camera lens, but still keeping the elements really, really sharp, and just the background going off into nice soft haze. So we're back with a garden by Arnie Maynard. This is Haddon Hall up in Derbyshire. And for this shot I was on a roof with my tripod, and it was a piece on his work. And it was one of those days where everything, it was a northwesterly. There's, again, people have, with photography, people like, certainly landscape and garden photographers, they often like to go out in a northwesterly wind, because you get fantastic clouds and you get a very quick movement of clouds, because you quite often get a nice strong wind with it. And things change very, very quickly. And as you can see with this, so you're in that same position, you're looking down, you're thinking, well, what's going to happen? How are things changing? And it's just literally as if someone's put a light on. And that constantly happens. And it's kind of, again, it's just that bit of patience, rather than always constantly looking through your camera and towards the view. It's sometimes a good idea just to look up to the sky and to see actually where the light's coming from and how fast the clouds are moving and where the light's going to come through the clouds. And this is another one of Arnie Maynard's gardens, Appleton Manor in Oxfordshire. And again, very, very dramatic day. Lots of moments where it was completely overcast, and then every so often the lights came on. And you get this wonderful transition between, I mean, it really is literally as if the lights come on, isn't it? Whether, I can't even remember which one was used now, actually. But it's one of those, again, it's remarkable and very dramatic how a garden can change so abruptly and so quickly from a change of light. This is Curated Manor in Wellington in Somerset, and lovely traditional cottage garden, shot again at sunrise. This was actually a cover for Gardens Illustrated. And we're starting now to think about composition within the garden and how things work together. And again, just seeing how these dots of blue work through on the diagonal that runs through the top of the garden. So, and just getting enough of the house in to give it a sense of place. The only thing I didn't like about this shot actually was this patch here. I find it slightly dark, but again, it's you know, there's not much you can do about that. I probably came over and took some other shots, probably composing around here, but I would have been missing out too much of that. But again, set up way before the sun rises so that you have plenty of opportunity to move around and get the whole job completed. And this was, again, another shot that was taken within the last 2 weeks. This is Great Comp Garden, Dyson's Nurseries in Kent. Evening light, which I think you can see that now. You can start to see the difference. There's definitely more warmth to an evening light, and slightly harder colours come through. And as I said, this time of the year, it's lovely. And again, composing the picture so that all the elements within the garden flow through nicely, and just having enough of the green in the left-hand side to give it, to pull you through into the shot, and to sort of walk through that pathway. And the magic filter, if I didn't have my neutral density filter on this shot, this whole area here would just be completely white. You can actually see the effect of it in the top of the tree there, because it's quite dark. That's the payoff. That you will darken certain areas that you don't necessarily want to darken, but consequently it does enable, it brings the eye straight into the block of miscanthus in the middle there, which is what I was trying to do. And this is from the same shoot, probably the last, 5-10 minutes after the last shot. working with the same idea of the soft evening light, but also using colour in a stronger way here. And positioning that urn so we just see enough of the house behind, and having this gap between the grasses and the urn, and just thinking about every single element that's actually in the camera. Quite often people will say, well, but it wasn't there. I took the picture, and when I took the picture, I swear I didn't see that there, because we'll be looking at a picture on a course or a workshop, and I'll be saying, but you've just taken the picture, but do you not see the big bare patch of soil that's in the bottom left of your frame? And they'd swear blind it wasn't there. But of course, it's that whole thing. Once you've looked into the centre of the picture, look at every corner. Absolutely every. I mean, actually, I've just seen that. I never saw that. I mean, I'd say that's. I would never leave that in. I mean, that's a classic thing, because for me, that's. I shall crop that, so or retouch it. But that's. It's just that whole thing of always looking throughout the entire picture and scrutinising it, and even if you're not on a tripod, to get used to doing that. I mean, my father was a classic. He always used to cut the heads off of people. And again, God knows how I got his same genes, but he never used to believe it was happening. And just not looking, is it? And this is Hannam Court, Julian and Isabel Bannerman, who had this garden just outside of Bristol. This was shot for Country Living a few years ago now, because I believe they've moved now. And again, it's about composition. You're confronted by this big house and these yew flanks along the side, these columns, this structure, lots of colour going on, big skies, big lawn, and it's very difficult not to take that shot. So consequently, I did take that shot, but also to explore it and to see different ways of positioning the house, bringing in more of the garden. We've still got this line of the path that actually draws the eye in. As a photographer, our job really is to take all the elements and to give the viewer a place to actually view the garden from. So this is where designers and photographers work together in trying to bring that all together. Because quite often your eye naturally goes to points of contrast, and that's one thing as a photographer you can determine, which you can't necessarily determine within the design. You can with planting within the design of a garden, but of course when you're there, I have been in gardens before where something hasn't worked at a particular time of the day, so consequently the design works, but the lighting doesn't work. So you have to rejig your time, and you need to return to that garden because the elements aren't going to work together. And this is, again, a garden in Monmouthshire, Camilla and Jeremy Swift. This is called The Pant. And it was inspired Cleve West's garden this year as well at Chelsea. And I shot this a few years ago now. And glorious day, probably too glorious to be perfectly honest, because the sky's a little bit dull. It's blue, but there's no texture in it. But the great thing about a day like that is it reflects nicely, and we've got perfect reflection in the waterway going down. And again, it's that whole thing of shooting it exactly as it's seen, but exploring it. And I did the same thing. I went up onto the wall and I thought, well, that's actually making a stronger composition for me, even though I've kind of moved away from the obvious shoot straight along the reel. But yes, again, that's probably that. I think that was shot obviously autumn time, and again you can just see the top of the picture. It's got that slight graduated effect on it, which is again just to bring the viewer's eye straight down back into the water. This is Cottersbrook Hall in Northamptonshire, and this is this was a 2-year project, because the first time I went to shoot here, the conditions were absolutely perfect, and I woke up glorious morning, but of course the night before there was a storm, and considerable amounts of rain fell in a very short space of time, and I literally arrived to see this herbaceous border, and literally I couldn't see the path. Everything had collapsed into the path, and of course no one from the estate or the garden had got to see it at that point, because I was the first one in the garden, so of course there was nothing I could do about it. So we rescheduled for the following year, and thankfully it was a much better year. As you all know, we've had a few bad summers, haven't we, over the last sort of 5 years or so, unlike this summer. So again, it's that having a line, a path that runs all the way through this gorgeous manicured herbaceous border, leading directly towards the urn at the end of the path, and that's the sort of classic view that most people will take, and they take it and they stop there and they walk on. But there's plenty more opportunities there where we can start to play with that composition, to see the garden in a different light, where we can see all these foxtail lilies that create a lot of height, and still the eye's drawn straight through the path. You end up at the urn at the end. It's doing the same thing, but you're just creating a different image from it. And this is back at Cotte Manor, a slightly fuller herbaceous border there, with a lot going on, quite frankly. So again, you can start to see that's how the sage takes you through. And again, the lighting's helping me there, because if that wasn't backlit, the light coming from behind on the right-hand side, it would have been very, very hard to have read all the plants within the border. And another technique that I use in these situations, when I'm trying to clean up an area of an image, it's differential focusing. It's basically just making the background as soft as possible. And instantly, I've taken a picture within the same framework that's enabled me to, your eye still goes through and feels as if you're in that border, but of course you're bringing the attention completely to that front plant, and the bascum spikes as well on the left-hand side. And you've still got that lovely sort of fluffiness to it all. And magazines like these kind of shots because it enables them to be able to lay copy over them, which often is great. This is from the same garden, again working with the same rules of composition really, and you can see the light's almost getting a bit too hard at this stage, because over on the left hand side I was quite lucky with this shoot, because by the time I'd finished this part of the garden, I'd done all the shots of the delphiniums beforehand at the front of the house. We had some cloud cover, which meant that I could take other shots that were tighter in, smaller details, pictures of borders and plant portraits, which of course you don't have to have such wonderful conditions for. But again, we've got a lot of shadow that's being casted here that's helping the eye to go through into the centerpiece there. And then same technique, focus on the unicorn and allow the rest of the image to soften, and it just cleans the image up and enables you to read it a lot easier. This is back at Folly Farm, and again working with the lines within the garden, but not necessarily positioning myself slap bang in the middle of it. So I'm looking at different ways to bring in all the elements, the poppies, the thyme, and also again trying to work out how I can create some interest beyond this element of it here by, again, using the sun in the top left-hand corner, allowing it to burn through slightly. And the light coming from that direction has really allowed all the colour within the thyme and the poppies themselves are just pinging beautifully there. And once more, I'm controlling the contrast area of the sky. So sometimes you're faced with a slightly different garden that doesn't necessarily have huge amounts of colour, but of course has a lot of structure. And with this particularly shot from an Arnie Maynard garden again, I'm looking at ways to create symmetry and a strong composition from quite a chaotic scene. There's a lot going on, so I'm kind of positioning everything in a certain way, making sure this tree doesn't collide too much with that centre U cone, and again the light allowing on the box hedging below, and as you can see once more the light's coming from behind, which really helps because it's putting a little rim line on everything that's structured. So I'm using both the design of the garden and also I'm using the light to tell the story. And again, all green predominantly, and using structural details within planting, so we could repetition of shape and texture. So the bottom of the picture, you have all these ferns, and then of course you're taken into these tree ferns, and then suddenly you're taken beyond, and this was taken at Tresco, and wonderful garden there, and very lucky to have the access to it first hours of the morning, so it was great to see that. But again, it works well for because of the way the lighting helps the actual composition there. And this is back to trying to work out ways of photographing your subject and bringing it forward and extracting it from a background. So quite often you'll have a clump of plants within a border, or you have a single plant portrait. And one of the biggest and the best techniques to extract is either through focus, as in making the background soft, through contrast, through different colours, different tones, and also not plonking the plant necessarily slap bang into the centre of the frame. So with something like this, if I'd made the background too sharp, all the grass would start to interfere. So I've used a slightly longer lens, and I've really softened the background to extract the detail of the plant. And again, back with the peat garden at Scampston, another shot that works really well. Very, very simple composition, but placing the seed heads, the phlomis, in a position so that I can get all that colour behind, but also cleaning the picture up by softening it. So if I had taken that picture again with too much focus in the background, all the trees, all the lines of trees you can see would just start to become too sharp, and it would start to compete with the seed heads themselves, and of course wouldn't have the same effect and probably wouldn't work as a shot. And you can actually see my hand in that one. On the top left hand, that slight colouring there, it's fine, we can get away with it, but that's my hand, because of course I'm shooting directly into the light with the camera in one hand and my hand coming over the other way, and just kind of trying to stop the camera from completely flaring. Again, this whole idea of working with thirds within a frame and not composing centrally all the time. Would have been very easy to have positioned the tree into the middle of the frame, or again brought more of the brunnera up to the centre, but it works better to have that that balance between 2/3 of the cherry tree and 1/3 of the Brunnera, and again pulling the tree slightly to the right hand side, so it gives you a much more pleasing composition, and again really allowing the background to soften nicely and not allowing too much in the background to clutter. And again, this would have been a shot that was taken early hours and hand holding as well, I would have thought. So gardens always a lot of gardens tend to have gateways and sort of interesting details within, apart from the actual plants themselves. And when looking for images, I have to consider the entirety of the garden, and these kind of shots I'm always looking to sort of bring the actual viewer to a point where they actually want to go into the garden and step through. This is back at Hannam Hall, the Bannerman's place, and again just that thing of opening the gate just a touch and to allow the viewer to walk through and want to be into that garden. And this is the gateway now to the Cottersbrook Hall, the borders that collapsed on me. In fact, I think this may have been taken the year the borders did collapse, believe it or not, because it looks as if it's a bit messier. But again, I've actually both opened the gate slightly, framed it and composed it in this particular way, but also softened the background, because I didn't want the viewer to be able to look too far into it. And again, the light's coming from directly behind, so it's enticing you in. So this is Bourton House in Gloucestershire. It's winter. I'm sleeping, which is lovely, so I don't have to get up at really ungodly hours. And it's a hoarfrost, which is just about everything you want for a winter shoot. I know a lot of the magazines are struggling this year getting winter features because, of course, we didn't really have much of a winter last year. So this is what happened. I mean, you can't really photograph winter gardens without having these kind of lovely frostiness or a bit of snow or something like that. And of course, we're all looking for the same gardens that work well in the winter, gardens with lots of structure. And this particular day was just phenomenal. I mean, I don't think I've been out in a day like it since, actually, where literally everything a certain height above the ground level was completely frosted, and there was icicles hanging off the trees, and you just see where it stops and actually starts to thaw out. And again, the composition works just exactly how it is, where you're positioning it in the centre, and obviously allowing this cross of the blueness of the top and the greenness of below the horizon line there. And that's the same garden, shot obviously on the same day. And yeah, so that was a cover actually for Gardens Illustrated as well. But completely as it was, nothing happened, all shot in camera, and yeah, just very, very lucky conditions. This is Abbey House Gardens. The naked gardeners, as probably people knew, the gardeners that lived there, and this was actually too much snow. So we've got a classic scenario now where the garden, for my purposes of shooting it, lovely for a Christmas card, but not much else. You can't really. And of course, the other thing that happens with winter shoots, you have to be a bit of a part-time meteorologist, and certainly drive something with 4 wheels, four-wheel drive, or have chains or something like that, because it's quite often hard to judge where you can be before the snow falls. So if you're working somewhere that's in the countryside somewhere that you're not going to be able to get there unless you're in a monster truck or something. You have to kind of judge your time with it. I mean, I know that with a particular garden in Devon for the RHS Rosemore, I had two winter shoots commissioned 2 years in a row, and last year there was no winter, and the year before that I got stuck twice getting there. And it really is that situation. You've got to think, right, there's going to be snow tonight, or there's going to be snow tomorrow. I need to drive there now, get there, and position myself so that I can be there for when the snow's come. And then, of course, you don't want anyone to go out in it, because you want it to be pristine. But there is actually, you see, there's a bit of stuff going on there. So I did actually reshoot that because I just felt, as lovely as it was, and it was a glorious day, I reshot it in these conditions. So the same garden, shot probably a couple of weeks later, with a nice frost, a nice dusting of frost, but instantly we can see it's quite considerably different. You see more of the garden, you see more of the design elements of the garden. It's probably could have done with a tiny bit more frost, I think, but everyone was happy, so that was good. And this is from the same shoot. Again, it's that whole idea of when there's water, you can get quite a lot of nice effects by doing timed exposures and just allowing the exposure to run on for 2 or 3 seconds, so you get this wonderful blurring effect. And again, it just breaks up the elements of this winter landscape quite nicely. And you can just see this sculpture coming in on the right-hand side, and the twig that breaks between where the water reflects and then starts to move through. And again, there's no light hardly at all. You can just see the top left-hand side, the sun's just setting away there. And there's me photographing in the winter, just to show this is where you need to be in order to get these shots. Not always, but I see so many people photograph plants from above, like this all the time. It's like, well, it's a bit, I see plants the same way as I see people. You know, they like to be spoken to at the same position. They like to be, they don't necessarily, I mean, sometimes if you've got something like a daisy or something that's or an aster that's a carpet of flowers, you can certainly photograph down onto them, but otherwise I always prefer to be at their level. And these are just a few pictures now are going to show you about controlling really bright summer's day. Can't really do much apart from, I'm photographing the lupins in the middle of this nursery. I've got a big diffuser up on the left-hand side, and I've got a reflector on the right-hand side, and it's quite chaotic. There's lots of things going on. There's lots of distracting backgrounds, and that's a shot. So it's just a way of, again, this is the thing. This is where you have to make something from every given situation. And this was a particularly difficult shoot because these are all winter flowering clematis, and I found a nursery that grew them, but of course they only had literally 1 or 2 flowers on any given plant, and I had to get 18 varieties. And there were just, it was a mess everywhere. And of course, as you can see here, I've got a pot that's being held by a clamp. I've got these other clamps that are holding plants in positions just to clean everything up and to try and construct a picture from it. And the same again, you can just see there, the plant's under no harm, by the way. It might look as if it's going under surgery, but I can assure you it's this here is actually this construction is called a clamp, and it's a plant clamp for photographers. And the idea is that at the top of it, it just goes around the stem of the plant without damaging it, and just stops the plant from moving around. Because obviously, when it's windy, you sometimes need a little bit of help can always keep something still, and that's the picture. So trying to clean everything around the outside from that exact bloom, and again the same within part of the same feature, and again same feature. The biggest problem here was there was just so many plants, because it's a very commercial nursery. I had canes and structure everywhere, so you just have to really, with plants, once you've composed and once you've kind of worked out how you're going to frame a plant, the next thing you have to do is worry about the background. The backgrounds become as important as the plant itself in order for creating the picture. And again, with all these kind of shots, you're constantly looking at ways to enable you to see the actual plant itself, rather than to see the mess all the way around it and too much detail beyond. And I'm always looking to, I don't take particularly close-up pictures of plants very often anymore. It's one of those things, it's a nice thing to do, and it's to abstract and to make macro shots. But generally speaking, as a commercial garden photographer, I need to be able to show the entire plant itself. And again, looking for different ways of photographing plants, giving them a little bit more interest, maybe giving it a bit more space, like these dahlia murky eyes, which are shot against the blue sky. And again, for all of these shots, I'm always diffusing the light. So I can take these shots of plants any time of the day, any conditions, as long as the wind's not too strong. And that's fantastic, because it obviously, I couldn't be completely at the mercy of the weather entirely. And again, this is the same thing. We're working in exactly the same conditions, because it's quite a small contained shot, I've got diffusers that I can just set up and position over the plant that enables me to take these pictures. And using different ways to extract the plant from the background. Again, where you have this complete frame of the same plant, and trying to work out a way of reading it and making a composition from it. As you can see, I've focused on this line here and allowed the rest to soften off, and then I've gone in tighter as well. And just taking more pictures as well, rather than just taking the one picture, just exploring it all the time. So I'm looking at ways of making sense of a chaotic framework, and both using light and using my focus points, and allowing it to soften off. Again, keeping that blue tone. We know that's a nice winter shot then. We were talking about window light earlier, and these are just literally a couple of shots that I had for a cut flower book I just shot with an author, and the entire book was just shot using one window light. That was it, really. And again, just making these beautiful compositions is a very simple way of photographing. You actually can't beat it. And again, this was from the Belgium garden, the gardener who was arranging pears for me, in just literally in this gorgeous window, in this darkened room, and the light falls off beautifully. And it's those kind of details I'm looking for all the time within the garden. So even though it's an obvious Vermeer style portrait there, I'm trying to look for that quality of light within my work. And these are the last couple of pictures, and it's just really about, if there are keen photographers out there, to try and work towards competitions. There's a particularly good gardening competition called the International Garden Photography Year. I know a few of you out there have entered it before. And it's a great way to focus your mind and to give yourself a brief. So if you do enjoy taking pictures, there's some great prize money, there's some great prizes, good kudos involved with it as well. But it will give you something to work towards. So rather than, I mean, if you're a photographer that likes to to just take pictures in their garden, and that's fine, but also if you're looking for something that you can gear your work towards something, this is a great one. And I think the competition is taking entries actually around January time, and I did enter these portfolio of inspired by a great photographer, Tessa Traeger, who did a wonderful book about some French producers, and it worked all with the kind of idea of vegetables and produce being dug up from the garden and just as raw as they could be in their hands. And I entered this to this competition a few years ago and got a third placement in the portfolio section. And again, for me, as a commercial photographer, it gives me something to work towards. And every so often it's nice to do something that isn't commercial and it's for me rather than actually a brief for a magazine. So it gives me a certain amount of relaxation. If anyone has any questions, anything technical, maybe I can see there's one person there.
Hi. I was wondering how you got into garden photography. How did you start up?
Right, well basically I'd studied photography and finished a few years ago now, and to the horror of my tutors, they wanted to keep me studio bound most of the time. I convinced them that I could take photographs outside and still be commercial, so I entered a competition with the National Trust, and I won the competition, and I got access to the National Trust Gardens as an agency photographer. So instantly it gave me a subject matter I could work with, and slowly over the years it sort of built. I assisted for 7 years after college, doing nothing garden related at all. Occasionally I did architectural based work as an assistant, but certainly nothing garden based. Because I mean that's the thing, as a garden photographer you obviously need gardens to photograph or plants, so that's an important part of it. But there's lots of organisations now that can help that type of thing. It can get you going. So.
Can you name a few organisations?
Yeah, well you can become a member of the Garden Media Guild or the Professional Garden Photographers Association, and you could become a probationary member. They can help, and once you become a member you can get access to certain gardens. RHS do allow photographers to photograph in the gardens at a fee. I don't know what it is now, probably 100 quid a year or something like that. I don't know, it might be even more. I'm not too sure about that, but they do allow photographers in. The National Trust are quite tricky, in fact probably very tricky, but if you're part of an organisation like the Garden Photographers Association, I think there are a couple of things that have been drawn up, so yeah. Oh, hi.
Do you ever go back and use film again, or do you?
Yeah, I do. I shoot film. Yes, not for anything commercial because I think I'd horrify people, because it's just that whole thing of what do we do with it now. But certainly for my own work, when I have time to shoot something for me, I will still shoot film. It's becoming quite popular again, actually, certainly within fashion photography. I know lots of guys in the fashion industry that are shooting film now. So do you shoot film? A little, yeah. I mean, it's lovely. I mean, there's no denying it. Yeah, exactly.
Why would you shoot film?
Well, it's just there's something nice about it. There's a quality to film. Not saying it's better than digital, because I mean that's an ongoing debate constantly. But there is a certain quality to it. And also there's just something very nice about print from film. But it's just not commercial. I mean, you can't, what can you do with it? Well, no, exactly. But then saying that, most photographic degrees still have a wet-based education scheme, so they all still have to have a certain amount of yeah, well, exactly. So it's Hi.
Slightly technical question. Those early pictures you had against the light,
Yes.
the moonlight and the sunset, and you used neutral density.
Yes.
Was that a graduated film?
Yes, it is.
And what sort of, what is it, the top third was about 2 stops?
2 stops. I've got a 2-stop, 1 stop and a half stop.
And the exposures, presumably you used a very small aperture,
Yeah,
a long exposure.
Yeah, not necessarily long exposures. Certainly, I would be on f/16 for those kind of shots. Big depth of field and bracket. So to make sure that you. I mean, I know there's other techniques. I didn't go into it in a great deal of detail, but I know some photographers that will take the darkest exposure and the lightest exposure and put them together at the end in a sort of like a high dynamic range effect, which of course I prefer not to do that, but it's another method of doing it really. Michael?
Some of your pictures are still quite punchy. The red seem very strong, the green. Are they affected in any way with Photoshop? Is that just how they come out?
It's just Lightroom. So I'm using Lightroom. The only thing that I have a set curve, and do you use Lightroom or is it all Photoshop or tool?
Well, I use it in Photoshop.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have a small contrast curve because if you shoot digitally, you know the raw files tend to be fairly flat looking, don't they? Yeah. So I basically have the calibration for the camera itself. So with Lightroom, if you use Lightroom as your processing tool, you can actually acquire a calibration for that particular camera and particular lens you're using. So that will instantly give you something that's rendering more. You know that when you look at the back of your camera, that's actually a JPEG you're viewing. So it's quite often a bit punchier than the actual raw file you get. So if you go through Lightroom, you can actually get the calibration for the camera, then you put in a small contrast curve and another function that's called clarity, and all that clarity does is basically cleans up the mid-contrast range, because where digital fails is in mid-contrast. It's just a bit flat. But the moment everything comes in, it just comes in with all that detail and all that all those curves on it. So really, it sounds like I'm doing a lot, but I'm actually not. I just bring them into Lightroom, and they come in and they look as punchy as that.
Most of the
You're next. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
most of your images were without any people.
Yes.
Do you shoot many?
I shoot I shoot. I mean, in fact, probably every day of a garden shoot, there'll always be people that I shoot as part of it. I just decided not to. I mean, I showed the picture of the chap at the end, which will be part of the feature. And of course you saw the picture of the gardener with the hoe. But yeah, no, I shoot people a lot in those given contexts really. I don't always, it's difficult to kind of narrow down 200,000 pictures to sort of like a selection and think, well, this is, you know, the breadth of what I do. But yeah, the one thing about garden photography is people like to see people within the gardens as well. So yeah, I do shoot people. Sorry, the lady over there, because I know you've been waiting patiently.
It's not a technical question.
That's okay. Not
I
garden.
No. I noticed that the photographs you showed us for the competition, in other words, your personal work, private work, are black and white. Is that because you're a bit tired of all the colour you see in the gardens all the time? Or why have you made a conscious decision to?
Well, I think yeah, no, it was definitely a conscious decision to take something black and white, or I actually shot them in colour anyway. But the film that I'd take quite often, I'd shoot with an old sort of Rolleiflex camera, and I'll put black and white film through it. But that black and white was the first love of photography, really. I mean, the whole thing of the reason why I do what I do, it was because of the darkroom. And when I was assisting, 3 years out of that assisting, I was actually working in dark rooms as well. So I really miss that whole thing of processing and printing. So trying to work up digitally an effect that I could get to a colour photograph became the challenge, really. Although ideally I still would have really have liked to have shot that on film with a with a large format. So any other questions?
When you are going to go to a shoot in the winter when you know snow is coming, do you stay in the house where the actual garden is?
It really depends. It really depends. That occasionally happens, or I just go to a local hotel, but obviously very local because the whole. Yeah, so that all depends. Yeah, I mean and how far, of course, it is away. But they are the trickiest. Winter shoots are incredibly tricky to get all those timings right. So yeah, but quite often you can stay in the house or the garden or whatever. So.
Yeah, a couple of similar things. You mentioned a link between the designer of the garden and the photographer.
Yes.
Have you designed your own garden based on your sort of understanding?
My garden's the biggest disappointment to me because, of course, my wife's a garden editor as well of a magazine, and we live in the middle of Bristol, so we have a small city garden. All of our garden's edible. But I come back, I see these wonderful gardens all the time, and you come back with grand ideas for a small space, and actually that just doesn't work. So, we're very keen gardeners, and we do try and create something on a much smaller scale, but quite often it's an impossible task, really. I mean, I work a lot with magazines like Gardener's World as well, so I do lots of practical projects. So although you're seeing all these beautiful pictures, I do lots of sort of landscaping style projects with presenters in Gardener's World, and I do things which they're always looking for ideas for small gardens. So I kind of pick up things from that as well. But yeah, it's always a disappointment coming home to my garden, unfortunately. Hi.
Do you ever take photographs of commercial landscapes?
Commercial landscapes?
Yes. Landscapes which have been designed by landscape architects rather than gardens?
Well, I think some of the... Yeah, I do, and I have done. I think some of the gardens I've worked in have almost form more landscape than garden, really. But the Orpheus or Boughton House was pushing towards that kind of feel where it's more about. I mean, you shoot it in a very similar way, and again with something like a parkland, you really do need to have strong lighting conditions. That it's impossible to do that kind of work in flat conditions, really. But you take the same skill set to it, so it's yeah. Other questions? No? Great. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.